The conversation that you get to hear today is 3 years in the making. I've asked the Popcast team for an interview since I started the Friendly Podcast Guide 3 years ago, and it finally happened. So excited for you to finally hear it. Hi, I'm Andy Smiley, your Friendly Podcast Guide. I help you start and launch a podcast that is fun and fulfilling without burning you out. Whether you're just starting or a few years in, I share tips, stories from my own journey, and insights from podcasters I admire. In this episode, I'm sharing my delightful conversation with Jamie B. Golden, one of the hosts of my favorite podcast, the Popcast with Knox and Jamie. I know that Jamie gives a lot of really awesome insights and advice during our conversation, and I know that that can be a little overwhelming. So, at the end of the episode, if you only have the capacity to implement one thing, I'll tell you what that one thing should be, so you don't feel overwhelmed trying to figure out where to start. But before I introduce you to Jamie, I want to take a second to tell you about my podcast Jumpstart sessions. So you've been thinking about starting a podcast, but every time you think about actually starting, questions pop up. What mic do I need? How do I get my show on Apple Podcasts? What if I start and then get overwhelmed? I get it. Podcasting can feel really overwhelming, but that's exactly why I do free 30-minute podcast Jumpstart sessions. It's just you and me on a call, chatting through your questions and figuring out what's actually holding you back. By the end, you'll know exactly what to do next. Plus, I'll send you my favorite mic recommendations, the best podcast hosting platforms, and your next 2 steps to get your show started. I only do a few of these calls each month, so grab yours before they're gone. Go to the link in the show notes to book your free podcast Jumpstart session. Let's make this podcast happen. Okay, without further ado, here is my conversation with Jamie B. Golden. I am so excited to have Jamie from the Popcast with Knox and Jamie on the show today. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited. I'm a little nervous, but Jamie told me I didn't have to be, so I'm going to try to not be.
Yeah, no, don't be nervous. Listen, the bar is so low. I've been podcasting for over a decade, and I do not know how to edit audio. I've never had to learn because there's just 7 people at our company that can do it. And so that's not a person you need to be nervous about. Like, you know what I mean? She doesn't have any skills.
I mean, you have plenty of skills. You're solid. Okay, so I know you very well because I am a super fan of the podcast, but my listeners might not. So to get to know you a little bit better, I have a couple of questions for you.
Okay, please.
The first one is, what's the last podcast you listened to for you? Not for research, not for like podcast stuff, just for you.
So it was this morning, and I listened to Search Engine by PJ Vogt, and it's a podcast that's all about questions that people have on the internet. And sometimes it's about the internet. It often is about the internet. So like today, the question was, what happens when a cemetery goes out of business? That was the episode I listened to today. And it was just talking about like the history of like where we go when we die, like physically, where not like what happens after, but like where do we go when we die? And I love it. And PJ Vogt, he asked lots of weird, like one of his episodes was, why is the pool at Buckingham Palace a secret? And he just like they went to England and tried to figure out like, what's the deal with this? So it's random deep dives into very niche things that you normally would never think about.
Yeah.
It's almost like one of those images on a sidebar of a website. You'd be like, I do want to know the answer to that question. And he does it in an hour form, about once a week. So I love that.
Oh my gosh. Maybe I've heard of that podcast, but I don't remember right now. And that sounds fascinating. I'm definitely adding it to my list.
He makes great audio. He's really good.
And that always helps. So
yes.
I love that. Okay. I'm definitely adding it to my list. And I'll put it in the show notes so that all of you don't have to search for it. I'll just put it there for you. Okay. The second question is, what's a simple life hack that's making your life better right now?
Okay. So I have ADHD, and I am currently unmedicated and I'm very pro medication, but I have a therapist who helps me, but also I have a life that's pretty conducive because I have a schedule that will like allow me to work when the mood is right and I can kind of push through, even though it's a full-time job. And I'm working from home today as I'm recording with you. And so, but one of the things that I love, and I think these benefits everybody, are timers. And so there are great timers on Amazon, not just like a turn the dial timer. You can have that. And they have those where a pizza appears when you turn the dial. Obviously, that would be amazing. But I
Yep.
have what's called a multi-sided timer that just based on what I need. So it'll have 5 minutes up to 90 minutes, but it's like, do you need 25? You need 10? So it's really quick. I don't have to think through. I know that might sound silly, but I have time blindness, which means there is no concept of like, what time is it now? How much time has passed? And it's very common for people with ADHD. And so when you're doing a business and you're on a schedule and you have a recording deadline or you have whatever the work requires, it's nice because I'm very competitive. So I'll just set a little timer of 15 minutes and be like, how much can I get done in 15 minutes? And that works for me. That's a life hack that actually keeps me as productive as I could possibly be, for sure.
Totally. Okay. And that's really pretty too. Like that's a pretty timer.
I know. So it's not like those like kitchen timers that have a rooster on it. Although
Right.
to each
Right.
their own, right? It's casual. It's very subtle. It's like, oh, is that a medical device? No, it's just a pretty tchotchke she got at a rest stop. So
Totally. Okay. You've convinced me. I think I'm going to go buy one because
okay,
that's
good.
cute. I love that. Truly, that question is kind of almost more for me. Like, I love to
What?
hear what you guys
What's
like.
the
What all
point
of
of
my
having a
people do.
podcast if you can't collect life hacks for yourself? That's the whole
I
purpose.
mean, yeah, it's kind of the best. So
Yeah.
here we are. Okay, now we get to dive into the podcast, which is truly one of my very favorite podcasts. I found podcasts right after my son was born 7 years ago.
Okay.
Because I was bored out of my mind with a newborn. And I still had to be with him, but I could
Right.
listen to something. And so that's when I found the podcast. One of my mom friends was like, have you tried this? And I was like, no. And then I was hooked for the rest of eternity. And so I've been listening for 7 years and I
Oh my
love it
gosh,
so
thank you.
much.
Thank you so much. Listen, we
Yes.
get a lot of bored moms.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
a sweet spot for us.
Yeah.
Because you're just in those late hours at night where you're like, if I had an earbud in, I could be productive during this feeding, or this kid just needs to sit on they got to do tummy time.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
can't leave because I don't want them to like face plant. And we're great because like you could listen to like the history of the Roman Empire, or
Right.
you could listen to us talk about, the Super Bowl, or you could listen to us talk about the Oscars and ridiculous stuff. You also could listen to us talk about, the grossest words in the English language.
Oh my gosh. I did just listen to that episode. It was delightful.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes. Well, and I think when you listen, it's great to learn while listening to podcasts. Like,
Sure.
there is a time for that, but you usually do not laugh nearly as much listening to a history podcast as you do listening to the podcast. And we all need to laugh to be healthy. So,
Yes, it's critical.
yes, exactly. Okay. So, that's a little bit about my love of the podcast. What is your favorite part about creating the podcast?
So we've been making it since 2013, which is a long time. And Knox, who is my business partner and my co-host on the podcast, he is so different from me in the sense that he is very esoteric and very, he's quite literate. He's literally an author. He's written 2 books, but he's also very savvy when it comes to a hot take. And I'm more reactionary and just like, which is why I have to be bleeped a lot and censored because I can get too off the rails for sure. But I love being able to talk about something because our tagline, we say we are delightful idiocy. And for me, that's really fun because sometimes you need an outlet. And for our listeners, I think one of the reasons we've been successful is that we don't take it so seriously, but we take their experience seriously. So we want a listener to have a great time and feel like there is an arc to it. I like that we have a rhythm to the work. People can know what to expect. They're like, I know that right now we're going to do an A segment, then we're going to do lights, then we're going to mention Amazon or whatever. And I love that because people can know like, hey, no matter what the topic is, they're going to make sure we have a good time. And I like having a good time. That's one of my favorite things to do. And so to get to do that for a job that actually like pays my mortgage, it could not have worked out better. I love it so much.
Yes, I love it too. And it definitely comes through that y'all are having a good time because I think when you guys have a good time, it's so much easier for us as listeners to have a good time.
Yes. And when you do it this long, sometimes that can be a lot of labor because it's hard to surprise Knox anymore. It's hard for him to surprise me because we've made literally thousands of hours of content. But when we can hit a topic that's just ridiculous enough where we wander off in the best way, and we wander off a lot, and not all of it produces comedy, but when we can, we know that the listeners are going to be all in, and we can tell because that episode, lots of shares, lots of replies, lots of comments. And then we take that and we put it on the whiteboard to go, okay, that hit in a different way. And so, but we also want to make content we like. But I think that's one of, if I were giving tips to, well, I've given tips to lots of people who started podcasts, but one of them is don't do what you like, do what your audience is going to like, that fits in with your skills and your talents, whatever that is, because the audience will then prompt you to be excited about the next episode you're going to make, because you know that their dialogue is going to be fun, because our audience is very smart and funny too. And so it only elevates the experience for us to be like, okay, they love that. We had a good time, but they also really loved it too.
Definitely. Truly, I get that question a lot. Like, how do I know what my audience likes? And the best part is just to experiment, try things, and then see what hits. And then when that hits, do it again.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because what happened to us last year is we did an episode on Kate Middleton, because we were like, where is Princess Catherine? Because she had been, I don't know if people remember, but she was missing for months. She had not been seen publicly. And we just were like, let's have a conversation about this. Now, did it create a lot of tension for the people that were like, how dare you speak of the royal family in any way at all, as you dumb hick Americans? We were like, we get it. But that episode went through the roof for us. There were a lot of hate listens, but our own audience was like, oh, I liked understanding that. I think that's the other thing is like, sometimes you're in a topic that you think, oh, everybody knows this already. But in reality, it's like, no, they're like living their lives and going to book club and reading smut and playing golf. Like they're not consuming it like you are. And so that episode made us go, oh, we should do more explained episodes. Like we should explain these big concepts that people don't understand as much, because they took off, and we have done that. Like we've incorporated that into our rotation.
Definitely. Okay. I love that. To switch gears a little bit, I want to talk about how you and Knox and your whole team have been able to build such an awesome, lovely community. Like I am a part of it, so I guess I'm kind of calling myself awesome, but it is such a fun place to be on the internet. And how did you make that happen?
So what originally happened, so as podcasters know, you make money normally from ads on your show or from other products that you might make yourself. Like if you're an author or if you're a course creator, you might sell those things in this space, or merch or anything like that. So when we were starting out, it was a hobby. Like Knox and I had full-time jobs, and as many people start, it was in the margins. But then we were like, we should diversify. It was just a good concept for both of us to go, we should diversify our income. Like if this is going to be ads, let's make sure we have another layer. And we did have people that were like, I want more episodes. And so we were like, okay, let's do that. And so we created a Patreon community, a membership group. Currently there's about 13,000 people in it. And when we started, we had to kind of experiment. We started with like 9 levels, all named after famous Chris's. And literally the highest level was I would ship you baked goods, because I was a baker for a season of my life. I'm an Enneagram 7, ADHD, ENFP, woo. And so I've done a lot of jobs. I'm a social worker by trade, which is even weirder. But we just said, okay, that didn't work. That's too complicated. Let's fix it. And so what happened was we were able to do, as often you're able to do behind a paywall, be more ridiculous, take more risk, because you had a safe space to be like, let's try some stuff that's weird. And we've tried a lot of weird stuff in that community, and they welcome it, embrace it, celebrate it, critique it, criticize it. But they always feel like they can do that because we do care about their thoughts and opinions. We don't make every decision based on that community. But I think one of the things that made that community very sticky when you're trying to build a subscriber base, whether it's paid or not, is over delivering everything that you've promised. And we really have committed to over delivering. Like these episodes will be fun. They'll be deep dives. We want your input. Which movie do you want us to watch? What TV show would you like us to go back to their pilot program for? Like we engage the community, and we have done that from the beginning in terms of building an audience. even on our Instagram or in our newsletter or on Twitter or wherever, we have tried to be really engaging. I see a ton of creators on the internet that just post and ghost, and they do not engage with the comments. They don't answer they even have lines in their bios that say not in the DMs, which is fine. That's a choice. But I feel like the better choice is to build an audience one by one, because the way that you found out about it from a mom friend. That's how everyone finds out podcast, is either
Yep.
through someone texts them, listen to this episode, this was funny, or they share it and say, this one was great. Or you're already listening to podcasts and you hear a podcaster on another show and you go, oh, they seem smart, fun, sexy. I don't know, whatever drives you to listen to a
Whatever you're
podcaster,
looking for.
whatever
Yeah.
you're looking for. And so building that community, we were so intentional about it. We've cultivated it. We've really worked hard to keep it a fun place that people want to be a part of, that they want to be there.
Definitely. How long have you guys had Patreon? Like, so you started Popcast in 2013. Like, how long before you started Patreon?
So when we were podcasting, we got to the 2-year mark and we were making an episode every week. And we said, okay, we can't keep doing this. This is really, I was like waking up. That was really the issue. I was like, I cannot keep waking up at 5 before I'm going to my full-time job to record this. And then we were trying to do some bonus content and so more than one episode a week. And we finally sat down, he and I, and as a point of note, Knox and I, we'd only met in person once before we made this podcast. And so we weren't in the same state. We're still not in the same state. And so we finally like drove and like met at a Starbucks and we're like, okay, if we're going to keep doing this, what has to happen? And one of the things was we have to make money. We have to grow our audience. Like that, we just have these like 7 very specific measurable goals, right? And when we made those goals, one of them was we have to launch a membership. And so we launched that in 2015. And so, and when we started, it was like, I think it took a year to get to 300 people. And we were so pumped. We were like, we did it. Like these people, they were so sweet.
People,
It's a lot
that
of
really
people.
want the
Like if you
podcast.
were in a room with 300 people, that's a lot of people. And so we were so pumped. And to this day, of that 300 that came in that first year, 220 are still supporting us. And
That's amazing.
which is amazing. And we don't experience a lot of churn, but it's been a long time. It's been over 9 years. And we try to innovate, but I'll tell you this, people like their rhythms. They like things to be, they know that the episode comes out on Wednesday. They know that they'll get a bonus on Monday. They know that we're going to do a live video AUA on a Tuesday. They like the rhythm of it. And so it's finding that balancing act between like innovating for yourself so that you don't feel like you're just phoning it in, but also honoring that your audience has paid for this or they're showing up for this or their expectations are this, and communicating well if that's ever going to change.
Definitely. Yeah. Treat them like you want to be treated, right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. If you're going to miss a week because all of you somehow got the flu at the same time, then you got to tell people you can't just not show up.
God, you really...
Not that would ever happen.
Listen, I was on an AUA literally while having a kidney stone attack, to the point that at one point I get a text in it going, "Are you okay? You look like you're fading fast." And I was, and like ended up having to like just drop off at the end because I was like, I have to crawl to some sort of, I don't know, I have to get drugs. I don't know what needs to happen. But we also were like, why? We used to do that, and we were like, why are we killing ourselves? Like, our audience is so kind and compassionate. They understand that you get sick or that you, like, something bad happens and you need to take a week off. But we really don't do that ever. We just either do a replay or we throw in one of our other team members who can sit in. But I don't think I've missed an episode. I've probably missed one episode in 12 years.
I was going to say, since I've started listening, you missed one because you had pneumonia and you couldn't talk.
I got a pneumonia and a double ear infection. And I could not speak. Aaron jumped in, and then we got a friend who, Pantsuit Politics, which is a political podcast, Beth came and sat in for me. And what was so maddening is like everybody loved her, and I'm like, no one likes me anymore. And then I was like, oh, it's just because she's a soothing podcaster. I am not a soothing podcaster.
She does have a very soothing voice.
It's
I really
so
love her
soothing.
podcast.
You could just listen to her and be like, I feel better about the world.
Yeah, which I think is probably one of the many reasons that their podcast is successful.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. I was coaching a mom who was starting her podcast, and she was like, everyone that's listened to my trailer tells me how soothing my voice is. And I said, just so you know, that's not everyone doesn't get that. I have never been told that I have a soothing voice.
No one has ever, one of our team members published a book, and I was at a book party for her last night, and somebody said to me that they listen to the podcast as they go to sleep each night. And I went, so what kind of childhood trauma did you have? Because that's why you would do that. There's no way that you would slow this down and like put it in your ears to go off to dreamland. I can't imagine.
I mean, to each their own. But yeah, I couldn't do that either.
Yeah.
Okay. We've been talking about how long you've been podcasting. And first of all, brava. I don't know if I've said that yet. You're awesome. Second, what has been the most surprising thing since starting the podcast?
The surprising thing was that for me, like I'm looking back and we were having a good time when we started, and we liked these subjects and they were really important to us in terms of like our affection for them. Movies, TV, music, books, all that. And so it was so fun. But then what happened was we did a live show 3 years in to celebrate our 3rd birthday. And when we were in that little tiny theater with this little group of people that had come to Birmingham, Alabama to have our little live show, and we were so excited, but it was so funny. We would talk on stage and people would talk back, not like heckling, but like, and I would like, oh, we can hear them. And it was their favorite thing because they're like, oh no, I'm always yelling at you in the car, on the treadmill, or on my walk, or while I'm rocking the baby or whatever. And so the surprising thing was that people got so invested in us, not just financially. That also was a surprise. The investment across the board, that people would be kind to us. People would send us, like someone crocheted me a Kindle cover for my Kindle and sent it to me as a gift. Like the investment of the affection was such a surprise because, to be honest, I don't think of any podcasters that way. Like I listen to podcasts every day, and I don't think I should send Ezra Klein like a sweet gift. Like I don't think of him that way. And so, and he probably would be like, what is this? But when I like, there's so much, like if you're watching a video, so much of this art behind me is things that people, there's like a needle pointed outline of my head that says, how dare you, in the middle of it, which is something I say a lot.
Oh my gosh.
A listener sent that. Like there's so many things, so much kindness. So the fact that the audience was invested back in us, obviously with their time, every audience member is invested with their time, but that it went beyond that they wanted to follow us on social, and they wanted to DM us, and they wanted advice, and they wanted tips and tricks about like what to watch on HBO Max or what to watch on Netflix, and that they really were engaging with us. It was such a gift. And I know now, knowing lots of podcasters, that is not the norm. Like it is not the norm for most. Most podcasters are just, again, putting stuff into the world, posting it and ghosting. And I think that's such a lot. They're missing out on such smart, fun engagement that they could be having.
Totally. Oh, I love that. And yes, I love that needlepoint. That makes me so happy.
I know. It's so sweet. It's just it's such a gift to have something you make that's really ridiculous, like on purpose, and people can be like, oh, this is important to me. And that's the other thing is I was surprised by how many people over the years, and it happens constantly, it literally happened this week, of people talking about like, we have to drive an hour twice a week for chemo, and we listen on the way. I had coffee with 2 sisters yesterday that they said when they moved cross country, they would queue up the episodes and like listen in the 2 separate cars. And then they would stop. They would talk about the episode, and that got them across the country. And it was so kind to get to be in people's ears. I'm not hyperbolic about this. It's such an honor to be in people's ears. It's an intimacy that I don't think most people realize, because you feel connected to a person who's literally just talking about Wicked, the movie. It's not spiritually life-changing necessarily or emotionally life-changing, but it's a little break from whatever's going on in a person's life that might be heavy. We like to be that light in the midst of that.
Definitely. And I think we need to remember that not every podcast is going to be like really educational or life-changing, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good thing to be creating.
Yeah. Sometimes when podcasters are starting out, they get too big, they get too vague in what they're going to talk about. They're like, we're just going to chat. Nobody wants to hear that. But here's the thing. You don't have to get listened to by everybody to have a long life in this industry. We are not listened to by everybody, but we're listened to by enough people that then when we convert about 10% of them to become a part of our membership, I'm in a house that the Popcast built. I'm wearing a sweater from Target that the Popcast let me buy. So I think sometimes podcasters can get too like, we'll talk about anything. And then what happens is people are like, no, I want a deep dive, or I want something super niche. And there are podcasts I like that are just like, so like, they're just podcasts about my neighborhood. And it's like, yes, that's what I want to listen to.
Totally.
And nobody else is going to listen to that outside of the neighborhood. But it doesn't need to be more than that.
Totally. I agree. Okay. As we're wrapping up, I would love for you to give your biggest piece of advice for podcasters.
I think my biggest piece of advice is I'm going to cheat and do two. So
that's okay.
Because I think they're equally important. Consistency is so critical. People love their rhythms. And I think sometimes when podcasters are starting out, they're like, well, I'm just going to do a season of 4 episodes and then I'll come back next year. That audience will have left you. They will not be with you anymore. Being consistent, especially when you're starting out, showing that, hey, I'm showing up, because you cannot ask other people to show up if you are not showing up. And then the other thing is editing is so critical. It can be difficult for me because I'll have prepared really the history of Dr. Dre and it'll get cut from the episode. But I know that was for the sake of good content. So I'll listen back to clips sometimes and I'll go, oh, that's not how that conversation went at all. It's gotten tightened. It's lean. It's smart. It's quicker. It's so much better. You have to check your boredom. You have to see, am I bored listening back to this? If you are, it's got to go. You have to think about, this is the first time someone's heard us. Like, this is the first episode that they might have ever heard. Let's dress to impress and see if we can't convert them. Because that's what you're trying to do. You're really presenting yourself and going, I hope you like this. And no, they might not. And that's okay too. But maybe they will like it. And then maybe that person will like it so much that for the next 9 years, they'll support you every month financially. That's a big deal. That's a very big deal.
Totally. Thank you for sharing. This has been delightful.
This has been a delight.
Listeners, if you are not already listening to the podcast, this is my glowing endorsement. I love the podcast and you should listen because they are delightful and they make mostly, honestly, I listen to you when I fold the laundry because I hate folding laundry. And so I can listen to you and laugh while I'm folding laundry and it makes it so much better.
We're like a nice red wine paired with a beautiful steak, except the steak is laundry and we taste better than red wine.
Yes, I love it. Well, thank you for being on the show, for giving such great advice and for creating such a beautiful show and community. Just, you guys are awesome.
Well, that's such a kindness. Thank you. This is an honor. It's an honor to get to talk to your audience.
Isn't Jamie just a delight? I'm still a little starstruck and flabbergasted that I got to have her as a guest on my show. There is one thing that Jamie said during our conversation that I want to push back on just a little bit, and that is when she was talking about consistency. Y'all know how I feel about the word consistency when talking about podcasting. It's not my favorite. During our chat, Jamie said that being consistent is one of the best ways to be successful. And then she used the example of someone who put out 4 episodes and then took a year-long break as someone that probably isn't going to be successful in podcasting. I completely agree with her that 4 episodes isn't enough to help people get to know you and recognize your brilliance. And I also totally agree with her that taking a year break between putting out episodes isn't a good idea. But I am a seasonal format girly. And I truly think that it's the best way to create a great podcast that doesn't burn you out. So instead of trying to consistently put out an episode every week, I think the best way to be consistent, quote unquote, is to have a seasonal podcasting schedule that your listeners and you can rely on. Okay, I'm hopping off of my soapbox now. As I'm wrapping up this episode, here's the one thing you should implement in your podcast if you're feeling overwhelmed and not sure where to start. And that is editing. You need to edit out more than you think you should. And I'm not talking about getting rid of all the ums and the pauses. I honestly think you should keep some of those in because that helps the conversation sound way more natural. What I'm talking about is getting rid of anything that isn't moving the conversation forward. My chat with Jamie had so many fun moments in it that I had to cut because they weren't applicable and they were slowing down the energy. So I had to be brutal in my editing to make the best possible episode, even though it felt a little bit like tearing my heart out. There's so many fun moments. Maybe I'll do like an unedited version as like a bonus episode or something because Jamie is just a delight. But for this episode, I wanted to make sure that that energy was there and that only the very best parts were in this episode. So I'm trying to lead by example and show you that we need to be brutal with our editing. Your listeners will thank you and then tell their friends about your awesome show. Will you share this episode with your podcasting friend who needs some podcast inspiration? Jamie will help them get excited about podcasting while giving some great advice along the way. In next week's episode, I'm sharing a recap of how the launch of Season 3 of the Friendly Podcast Guide went, including how many downloads my podcast trailer and the first episode of Season 3 got. Thanks for being here, and I'll see you next week.